Just going to give everyone a minute or two to join. Excited to kick this off. During the presentation, if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the chat feature. We can kind of jump into some of those as we go. And there's a section towards the end for specific Q&A. So don't hesitate to use that, and we'll kick off in about a minute. Awesome. So kicking off, again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the chat feature in Demio. We'll be monitoring those during the presentation and happy to jump into any of them as we go. But just as an introduction, my name is Matt Bahr. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Fairing. We are a customer insights platform really focused today on post-purchase surveys. We power post-purchase surveys for over 2,500 direct-to-consumer brands today. Everyone from Allbirds to Skims uses our product to solve attribution and a few other use cases that we'll get into in the presentation. So first thing I want to kick off with is just survey data. So survey data historically has always been put in the research corner. Survey data has always, it's been something that maybe you do quarterly, you're sending it out to a huge email list. Hopefully you're getting maybe a 30% open rate on those emails, 5% click-through rate, maybe if you're offering incentive, and then hoping that customers submit those surveys. So it's always been something that a customer insights team has owned, not something really a marketing team has owned, just because it has never really been a large source of continuous data. And what we're doing at Fairing is looking to change that. We're looking for our customers to think of the survey data that we're capturing very analogous to your Google Analytics data, your click data, the data that you're looking at daily, feeding into your other MarTech stack and allowing you to make decisions in real time. So that's the one thing to focus that I'll focus on here is we're an always on solution. We don't want, you would never turn off your analytics tracking or maybe your attribution tracking data for a week. And that's really how we see our survey data that we're capturing here at Fairing. And the reason why so is the reason why we look at this and why we want to turn on the faucet of survey data. It's less of just this dribble coming out that maybe you're getting a response every now and then. You're getting real-time customer feedback, real-time customer insights. And we call this DFC data, which is direct from consumer data. For a while, it was, or the focus has always been on direct to consumer. It's selling to customers. And the way we view this is how do we create a better flywheel and get data directly from customers as well. So that's really where post-purchase survey data and survey data comes in that Fairing powers. And one of the core kind of aspects about Fairing that kind of saw here on this first screen is where we live. So how do we get so much data? How do we get such high response rates? And today, Fairing powers surveys on about 800,000 orders a day. And the reason why we're so unilaterally focused where we live today, which is that order confirmation page, is because response rates are so high. So platform average is about 45%. most customers range between 40 and 60%, depending on the implementation. And what this high response rate gives you, it's 4, 5, 6x higher than what you'd be used to. It gives you a whole other way to think about survey data as a data stream, less so as something that maybe you're doing quarterly, exporting it from SurveyMonkey, joining it with your other data in Excel, giving it to an analyst for a few weeks, and then building a PDF that maybe gets circulated. That's really the big unlock that we like to power, is changing the mindset of kind of more or less a trickle to this faucet of always on data. And what can you do with post-purchase surveys with survey data once you have high response rates? So the use cases here are that we're going to focus on is just attribution. Again, kind of the topic that we're all here for: personalization, conversion rate optimization, and just general insights. So attribution, again, the core question to ask here, which we'll dive into in a second, is how did you hear about us? It's understanding that top of funnel. Personalization is really anything that you can ask a customer that would allow you maybe to better send a more targeted email to, send a better SMS message to, really learn about who that customer is. CRO is questions that you can ask about the shopping experience. So the kind of the layup is literally, how was your shopping experience? We recommend customers turn that question on post-purchase, leave it on for a week, gather a bunch of insight, maybe pump it into Gorgeous or whatever kind of product management tool you're using as well, to create just a checklist. It's like, hey, our return policy isn't super clear. A lot of customers are complaining that they didn't know what it was. And the fourth use case is really just customer insights. And so this is questions like age, gender, anything that would allow you to better understand your customer in that demographic. So just jumping into attribution, and really just want to harp on how we view attribution. So attribution to us, it's a moving target. It's something that is never going to be kind of black and white as far as how you go about it. And we really think of kind of triangulating attribution. And this is, of course, where Rockerbox comes in as well. But we think of post-purchase survey data. How did you hear about us? What led you to the site today? And joining that with platform-specific reporting and click data to give you kind of this focal point of what is actually happening from an attribution sense. So we don't really recommend customers just use post-purchase survey. There's certain channels that we definitely lean into a little bit more than others. And obviously, as everyone knows, relying on last click in Google Analytics or whatever kind of reporting platform you're using isn't going to share any of those top of funnel reports. And then platform reporting. I think it's a moving wave as far as how accurate that gets. I think everyone's now concerned with iOS 17 and the implications of that for platform level reporting, and how the platforms like Meta, Facebook, TikTok, et cetera, are going to continuously be able to evolve and improve their platform level reporting. So this is, again, how we pitch Faring when it comes to attribution, is really focused on finding that focal point, building your own model, and at the end, building your own competitive advantage. If all of your customers are using the exact same methodology, you're not gaining leverage from the data that you have as a brand. And the only way really to do this is to build a better focal point with the data that you're capturing, and using PPS as a function in that. So just jumping into this, so understanding top of funnel, the easiest example here is just really comparing last click data versus how did you hear about us top of funnel data. So if you're not doing this today, highly recommend it. Even just turning on a post-purchase survey, whether you use Faring or a different product, and just being able to map these things will really expose quite quickly what's happening and what isn't. It's always this huge unlock when you look at last click UTM data, referral source versus survey response, and you instantly can tell, like, oh, like we are not measuring influencers or podcasts or all these TikTok conversions that are coming through are not actually showing up in our attribution reporting today. So that's kind of day one. We recommend just really leveraging the top of funnel and understanding there. The second one is the known unknowns. And this whole concept is really around this idea of you don't know what you don't know. And there can be channels, there could be influencers, there can be other types of traffic coming to your site that maybe there's no UTM parameters, maybe it's a mobile app that you really just have no exposure to. And that's where this known unknowns concept is super powerful to allow you to just like understand a more holistic view of all channels by removing all of the other dependencies around click data, UTM data, et cetera. And then the last one is really just around validation. So we have customers, TikTok's probably the greatest example, where we have a lot of customers, especially early on, who are starting to lean into TikTok. They were looking to kind of grow this new channel. Facebook, Instagram was starting to get a little bit more difficult to put money in and get a positive ROAS out. And they weren't really sure what was happening. They didn't have the confidence. Maybe TikTok was reporting a 1x ROAS. And where PPS comes in really as this safety net from a channel perspective is just allowing you to validate and give you the confidence to lean in or lean out in that regard. Quite typically it's leaning in because we're kind of uncovering a lot of different things that are happening from the attribution, from the channel perspective side of things, and just giving you the confidence, oh, this might be working. Let's lean in a little bit more. And what we see very often is at certain levels of scale, the platform reporting starts to get a little bit more accurate, but brands wouldn't have that level of confidence to lean into that channel without having another signal, like just because they really were just too dependent on the reporting that they currently had and weren't looping in their customers. So when we talk about attribution surveys, there's three core questions. So how did you hear about us? This again is the de facto kind of bread and butter when it comes to attribution surveys. We recommend asking it in this way. It simplifies it. It allows the customer to kind of self-select into the channel that they think they heard about you in. Depending on if the brand is new or a legacy brand, we'd recommend this second question, which is what led you to our store today. We have this beautiful case study with Playboy, very much a legacy brand, who used this question to help understand top of funnel social advertising, especially on Snapchat, funny enough, to know if it was working or not. In-platform reporting didn't do a good job, and they used this, hey, what drove you here? Why did you buy today? To understand those top of funnel channels. And then the third question is really just around the when. So this one, I could have a whole presentation around when did you first hear about us? It provides a ton of signal into a few things. The first thing is how dependent can you be on platform level reporting? So there's these cookie windows, let's say with Meta, for example. If a user doesn't purchase in a specific period of time, you're not going to be able to understand that level of attribution from the platform, or maybe the user is switching devices over the course of multiple months. So if you have a kind of low cost item, typically that customers are purchasing within the first day to within the first week, you could probably lean a little bit more into platform level reporting versus if you maybe have a product that's over $200, over $300, that time lag, that screen that maybe we all, I don't know if everyone here has looked at that screen in Google Analytics, and it always showed that people are converting super fast, and we all knew that wasn't true. This allows you to see that by asking customers. And if the time lag is very long, you almost have to think about that path to purchase in a very different way than if the customer discovers your brand and purchases in the same week. So really good kind of level set. You can pivot that data, which is what we're going to get into in the latter half of this presentation, to really understand what channels convert faster versus others. So this is really what we recommend starting when it comes to attribution. And then just hitting home on this idea of joining data. So if you use SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, kind of all of these more legacy surveying tools, which have these monolithic lists of questions that fingers crossed you're lucky if your customers actually fill out the entire thing. Once you get that data, then you have to go act on it. And acting on it typically involves maybe an export. If you're really lucky, you're dealing with one of their, you have an engineering team that can pull this data in from an API. But realistically, you're probably exporting it to a CSV, exporting maybe your Shopify data or e-commerce data, joining it on order IDs or customer emails, and like trying to make sense of it thereafter. And the real value with post-purchase surveys, whether it's again Fairing or any tool that really lives where we live, is we're always joining this data to the order data. So you're able to make very quick decisions based on, okay, AOV for TikTok is X, AOV for podcast is Y. We could see this trending up, this trending down. So the joining of the two data is really where a lot of the value comes from. The real estate is important, how we ask questions is important, but really joining that in real time is something that we'd obviously push everyone to do versus using a more legacy surveying tool where this has to be done after the fact. And the next slide here is just a fun slide around attribution and a little shout out to Rockerbox here. So we look at attribution if you're literally just using GA, you're using last click, which there's still a ton of brands kind of relying on this, especially those that have been around a while. You don't have a very clear path of what that looks like. You're relying on last click, all that top of funnel traffic is kind of getting lost. It's a very simplified model. It's a simple way for a CFO to look at money in, money out. But again, it's not going to allow you to kind of create that competitive advantage and leverage up what you're doing from an attribution sense. The second path here is using Rockerbox and like using a MTA tool to really be able to model out this data. Pull in multiple different data sources for Rockerbox, pull in fairing data, pull in platform data, pull in click data, and really start to build this picture. But the one thing that no MTA platform can do is really understand where those dark traffic patterns are coming from. Like what percentage of customers are coming from word of mouth, for example? What percentage are coming through podcasts? Like you can rely on some of these with discount codes and custom landing pages, but at the end of the day, you're going to have a lot of drop off from users who are actually using those, or maybe just find a different code when they land on your site because you're offering one at email capture. So this is how we think about kind of this path to clarity. If we were just to switch Rockerbox and fairing here, it would be very similar. Like post-purchase survey data isn't going to be able to solve and model all of your problems. It's really thinking about this trifecta of modeling out data that you already have from platforms, from clicks, even thinking about some maybe media mix modeling on that side, and then really enhancing it with data directly from your customers. So just moving on to marketing 101 is really all about knowing your customer. This is just a PDF, so we did have some fun GIFs here that are a little bit static here, but knowing your customer is really what it comes down to. I think this process or just this strategy kind of got lost in 2015, 2016, when everyone was so focused on the arbitrage that brands could get in Facebook. And it was really less of who is my customer. It was more of like, let's try this creative and let Facebook go find my customer for me. And they were so good at that. They had so much feedback loops that they can kind of get that right very quickly. And as things got more difficult with privacy and everything Apple is doing, like we've almost had this deviation back to this concept of like, who is my customer? What is my persona? What are my different personas? And these are really important as you think about attribution from an MTA perspective or from a media mix modeling perspective. This is really the ground truth of how you should market. And I think that we're past the era when I talk to people who are using fairing of like, can you send me your personas? I think most customers have a document that they review pretty consistently about who they are. But early on, as we were going to market with fairing, like we have a question, which is later in this deck, called how would you describe yourself? And the use case there is just like ask your customers to put themselves in a persona. And if you don't have these personas built out, there's obviously a strategy to do that. But this is really where to start. And then you can start to pivot all this data out and make more sense of your attribution data, which is what we're about to get into. So where do we go from here? So we have our attribution data. We have our channel level reporting. We know that X amount of customers came from TikTok, Y amount came from Meta. What do we do from here? Like, do we just keep testing creative, as I said before, and kind of continuously pumping data into the platform, which is definitely a strategy. I know there's probably thousands of brands that continue to do that here. But going back to this idea of knowing your customer, like how do we know our customer? How do we do maybe customer interviews? How do we get this feedback? And that's really where post-purchase surveys can start to really augment and improve the value you're getting from attribution-related questions to learn so much more about your customers. So again, we started with how did you hear about us? What led you to our site? And now what we're able to do, since we have that user's attention post-purchase, is we're able to kind of drill down and ask more questions that'll then make that attribution survey data that much more valuable. The three, and this is kind of just going into this as well, as far as what else can we ask. So this is that order confirmation page, high intent, laser focused. You're not going to have this level of attention from your customer, arguably until they place another order. Maybe when they're tracking their order, they're going back to this page, but you're not going to have this level of focus and intent until that user kind of hands over their credit card and purchases another item. So just jumping into three additional categories, and I can mention a few questions here, but the four categories that we went over earlier was attribution, personalization, kind of research and insights, and CRO. And so personalization, again, anything that allows you to send a better targeted email is probably the easiest way to think about it. There's a ton of value kind of that comes with that as well, but just pumping this data into your ESP, into Klaviyo or Cordial or whatever you're using, and then pivoting that out will allow you to talk in a such more personalized manner to those customers. And the question that we love for this is, which of these best describes you? We'll show this in a second, but you take your personas, you build a question similar to this, and then you just allow customers to self-select. And questions like this have such a high completion rate because that consumer is just excited to tell you about themselves. If you don't have personas, good strategy here is just ask this question open-ended. Like after you ask, how did you hear about us? Just ask the question, how would you describe yourself? Leave that on for a week, again, depending on your volume, and let the customer build the personas for you. That's a really good way to start. It takes literally 2 seconds to start thinking about how to talk to customers in a more personalized manner. Second category is just research. Again, what is your age? What is your gender? What other products were you considering before you purchased X? Anything that can kind of help you round out that customer, whether it's demographic or psychographic information, is going to be valuable. And what a good place to ask this is right at the birth of the customer. Right after they placed an order, they're now kind of super focused, and you can learn a lot about them from a demographic sense. And that third one, CRO, again, just anything that'll allow you to create a list of items to then improve the front end of the experience to then convert more users in the future. So jumping back to attribution. So what is the value of asking these questions in an attribution or in a channel mix perspective? And that's really where we get into combining and looking at this data in a more pivot manner around how these questions interact with each other. So the example here that we're pulling is combining how did you hear about us with who is this purchase for? So we have, let's say TikTok. This person has answered the how did you hear about us with TikTok, and then they're answering it, who is this purchase for, spouse? And as we think about this data, we have the attribution data, let's say from Rockerbox, and we're joining that with fairing data. And then like, what do we do next? Do we just keep putting money into TikTok now that we learned this? How can we continue to evolve the strategy and maybe target customers on TikTok in an improved manner to get more ROAS, get higher click-through rates, and improve that channel in general? So now we're coming at, let's say, the TikTok channel in 2 different ways. We're coming at it from, okay, we know it's working, so let's put more money in. And now we've learned more about this TikTok customer to then go augment our strategy and get an even higher ROAS as we're putting more money in. So that's where the value of joining questions from one question with another in the attribution sense. So it's not attribution in the classical sense of what is driving this consumer to purchase from my site, but it is more or less a very valuable data point to go increase ROAS, increase your ROI on a channel, because you're able to better understand that customer that much better. So just jumping in, we're just going to jump into 3 examples as this. And this is just some example reporting from fairing. So again, this is that who is this purchase for? We're able to see here that customers who are answering this question in conjunction with how did you hear about us, let's say, have a little bit higher AOV than customers who are purchasing for themselves. So how can that go kind of adjust the strategy now that we know like higher AOV? We know that these channels, so like this brand arguably is growing very rapidly via word of mouth, and it's a gift giving product. So how can we kind of use that from a channel perspective? We know that TikTok here is a lot of gift giving, but influencer, strange enough, customers who are buying from influencers are buying for themselves. So how can we instruct and direct our influencers with that knowledge to allow them to create better content to then go increase conversion rate on our site from users that are coming from that channel. Another example here is, this is my favorite one. This is the persona one. Which of these best describe you? This is like an actual example from a customer of ours who sells this kit to analyze like Wi-Fi networks in your house. And he always thought that he was selling to a professional. He just was like, we are a professional product. All of their marketing was very much catered to that. He then started asking the question of just, how would you describe yourself? Very quickly found out that hobbyists were actually his highest source of new revenue and customers. And then started to, again, adjust his strategy to talk to hobbyists and less so professionals, especially on TikTok and these channels that these hobbyists were really coming from. So this is just a great example of how now he has a very specific channel strategy in conjunction with measuring and understanding attribution, just by adding another question post-purchase, and able to capture so much insight here that he's able to then make a very good kind of tactical decision around how to market on a per channel basis. And the next one, just jumping into that research kind of question, is age. If we have time at the end, I have a case study at the end of this around a backpack company in Brooklyn who used this as a kind of strategy and opened up this whole other source of new customers by just asking age and gender. So in this example, we could see, hey, customers who are 18 to 24 are coming from this channel. Customers who are Googling us who are much older demographic. So just another example of asking additional maybe demographic related questions to help understand a more specific channel level strategy to increase ROI. The one thing to mention about age, and I think TikTok might be developing something here a little bit too, but like this used to be like native to Facebook. So you used to be able to go into Facebook and pull a lot of this information out. And really with everything that's happening with privacy, these things are getting so much more difficult to learn. So if you're really trying to understand age and gender and kind of these more demographic related questions, there's obviously like third party, like Nielsen, you can go and buy a large report, typically costs you at a minimum $10,000 just to start enriching this data with third-party data. But the issue of that is it's third-party. It's typically anonymized, and it's not future-proof in kind of this privacy-focused world that we're continuously kind of heading into. So just one question, like age is not something maybe you need to ask all the time, but just pulsing your audience, especially if you're doing a fair amount of volume, will help you really build these demographic profiles and then go kind of enrich and steer your channel level strategy. So just to kind of keep hitting on this, attribution plus context increases your ROI. So if there's one takeaway from this, it's to just start thinking about your channels and thinking about those audiences in an additional like kind of pivot or layer beyond just creative and beyond just ROI, which I know most people really focus on. So asking additional questions post-purchase, again, it doesn't matter how you do this as long as you think about this data as kind of a faucet and more of another data source that's analogous to your Google Analytics data is really where you're going to be able to action on this. And then you can go pipe this into your ESP, pipe it into like any MarTech solution that you're currently using, a BI tool, Rockerbox, et cetera, and then extract more value out of those tools just because you have so much more context in them. So that's the big takeaway here is don't be afraid to ask additional questions, pivot out this data, join it with your attribution data, and then kind of look at the ROI and and develop more or less a strategy of how you can use that data in conjunction with the ROI data, the attribution data. So it looks like we have a few more minutes here. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in the chat. We do have a Q&A section here, which we can get to at the end, but we do have two quick case studies. The first one is a company called Brevity. They are in Brooklyn. Incredible backpack. I've had one for over a year now. And they are the perfect example of a brand who went to market initially with a Kickstarter focused with this camera bag. And their initial demographic was this 35 to 40-year-old male photographer, more importantly. A few years after they launched, they introduced a kind of everyday bag is what they call it, and like developed this whole new audience that was never going to purchase a kind of prosumer camera bag. And now they have this whole new audience that's driving the majority of their revenue on TikTok and other channels, who is a female and much younger than their initial demographic. So this is like a great example of a customer who started looking at a strategy. They were investing in TikTok. They were doing different kind of things to try to extract more ROI on a per channel basis. They started asking, literally it was age and gender, which was their big unlock, in conjunction with how did you hear about us, and learned that they have this whole new customer that they didn't even know existed. So just a great example of where pivoting can come into play. And if you recommend buying a backpack from Brevity, but also just taking a look at their social, like they really understand their customer more than most customers, especially more than their competitors, which has allowed them to grow so fast and so organically. And then I'll end with just another case study, which is Fume. So Fume is a device to help you quit smoking. And this is more of an attribution related case study here. And this one is mostly on the context of podcast advertising. So Fume wasn't started advertising on podcasts. They were relying on discount codes and didn't get a ton of kind of traction or ROI looking at just discount codes and landing pages. And they implemented a post-purchase survey, very quickly found out that podcast was working, and then was able to scale that podcast spend by 25x, I think over the course of like a quarter. And now it's their highest grossing channel. And it was all based on them just listening and getting this direct from customer data into their pipe to help them understand the actual true story of what's happening. So just two examples here. Again, the Brevity one is a little bit more focused on what we've been chatting with about combining multiple questions to really extract more value. And then kind of going back to our bread and butter with Fume is really like, how do we think about attribution? How do we enrich our data? And how do we bring customers into the loop to help us make better decisions? So with that, I'll open it up to Q&A. If anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in the chat. But if not, we'll wrap up in a few minutes. Yeah, so how many questions to ask? This like arguably is very subjective. It depends on the brand experience. We recommend starting with 3 to 5 and kind of just focusing on these 4, a question from these 4 core verticals. We do have customers that have 15 questions because they're really just in the sense of like, I have my consumer's attention. I'm never going to get this again. I want to extract as much value as possible. And what we see with our data is once a consumer gets to that 3rd question, there is a 90% chance they will get to the end of the stream, whether that's 5, 10, 15, 20 questions. So it really depends. Like after question 3, you can almost guarantee the very similar sample size. So a lot of customers start with 3 to 5, and then like we'll see and monitor. It's like, oh, they're like continuously adding questions just because they can know they can get this much more data. Increasing response rates. So a few things that come into play. The biggest one is order confirmation page load time, funny enough. If that order confirmation page takes like a second longer, the completion rate will be about 40-45% typically. Then if it's loading very much instantly, it's like 55-60%. The other function that'll come into completion rates is just user distraction. So if you have, there's all of these different apps and SaaS tools fighting for this real estate at this point. If you have other pop-ups, hey, refer a friend, use this to get money back, and you're distracting that consumer, that's also going to bring down the response rate. And that will usually bring it down to about 30%, 25 to 30%. So recommendations for increasing completion rate is like focus front and center. If you wanted to kind of increase completion rates kind of beyond our median, we recommend using a full page takeover. If anyone wants to buy anything from Made In, or I could follow up with a screenshot, Made In is probably the best example of a customer of ours who has done a beautiful job with this. As that order confirmation page is loading, it's front and center. How did you hear about us? You can always X out of it, which we recommend not to kind of push too much or force the user too much into completing it, because you're just going to get more noise, or even offering incentives can do that as well. So that's the the final example is using a full page takeover. If you're like really want to increase completion rates beyond 60, 70%. Awesome. We'll just give another minute, and if not, we'll wrap up. Yeah, so how long to let surveys run? It depends on the volume you're doing. So it's less of a function of time and more of a function of order volume. So the margin of error really starts to drop once you get beyond about 350 responses. Extrapolate it out, that gets very accurate. So that's kind of the ground floor that we recommend letting someone run, but it really depends on the question. So attribution related questions, questions you're maybe piping to your email service provider, we'd say run those all day, every day. Like build that customer profile on a one-to-one basis. But for those other kind of more sporadic questions, so let's say you're just pulsing for age and gender maybe, we'd recommend getting at least 350, 400 responses. If your completion rate is higher, maybe a little bit less, but again, depends on the volume you're doing. Some customers can get that in a day. Some customers might take a couple weeks or a month. Awesome. Well, I'm going to jump off stage. One more question. Does your opinion on the role of post-purchase change at all with average order value? So it depends on the variance of average order value, I'd argue, with how you think about that. We have some brands who they have a large, they sell a wide range of products, and different types of customers coming from different channels are purchasing different products. So sometimes we'll see like someone will go aggressively into podcasts and the AOV will be like 20% less than their other traffic AOV. And it's just really because that audience is purchasing a different product. So it's really informative on that side of things. Typically though, there's not a huge variance with AOV. I think the standard deviation is quite low, but it really depends on the amount of SKUs, the products, and how you're going to market with AOV. But again, if you have a much higher AOV on a specific channel, arguably there's a reason to kind of really focus on learning about that customer, leaning into that channel and seeing how you can grow that channel maybe more than another channel because that AOV is so high. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone so much. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. My email is just, I could put it in the chat here. It's matt@fairing.co. Whether you use Fairing or not, happy to jump into survey data. We have a few methodologist advisors as well. If you're like, hey, I'm trying to learn these specific or solve these specific problems and I'm not sure how to write these questions, we're always happy to help there. So don't hesitate to reach out. Send me an email. You can download our trial, et cetera, but definitely view me as a resource more than anything. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I'll step off and hopefully we'll chat soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. That was our first presentation for the day, and just a really great one to talk about the value of survey data and how it really does fill in some of those gaps because marketers have those questions, and it's, what better way to get it directly from the source.
Yeah, 100%. I thought it was an amazing session. I loved that Matt articulated the known unknowns, which I think is like, I hadn't heard that coined before, and I really liked that. And I think leveraging post-purchase surveys to kind of bridge the gap that exists in user level tracking for attribution is just so powerful. And I think that like going beyond the how, right? A lot of the time when we think of post-purchase surveys, we think about asking like, oh, how did you hear about us? And that's like the only question we think of right off the bat. But I liked that Matt kind of went beyond that question and really pushed into the context that I think is so often overlooked in attribution. So I loved that he pulled that into the conversation. And overall, I think this was a really great way to kick off day 2 of summer camp.
Totally. And thanks everyone for all the questions. I thought that was great. We're going to, in just about 20 minutes here, we're going to move on to our next presentation from Snapchat. Super excited to have the team from Snapchat join us. So that's going to be accessible through the link in your email. If you were here yesterday, you've heard me say this a million times already, but that link is going to come from Demio 15 minutes before the session starts. So just in a few minutes here. So we will see you over there. Thanks, everyone.